As much as I love being a CFO and crunching Excel spreadsheets, it wasn't really an inspiring life for me.
Because I think what happens, people assume they're never going to get there, but like I said, there are those levers. One of them is, if you are younger, you can take more risk with your pension.
Everything changes when you have kids, right? But in terms of planning for a happy retirement, I guess there's just that extra thing to think about.
So that's 2 lots of free money you're getting. You're getting a bit of free money from the government, a bit of free money from your employer.
Yes, so you would have to think quite hard about giving up free money, I think, especially in this kind of environment.
Hello everyone and welcome, and thank you for joining us this evening to talk about long-term retirement planning, which in a world where we've had 3 prime ministers in quick succession, the long term has suddenly taken on a new meaning, but it's an important time to be talking about retirement planning and pensions. And I've got some wonderful guests here this evening who are much more knowledgeable about it than I am, and they're going to hopefully guide you through your own journey so that you're well placed to retire well.
Hi everybody, my name is Ken. I'm one half of the Humble Penny and Financial Joy Academy.
My name's Mary and the other half of the Humble Penny and Financial Joy Academy.
I'm Romi, I'm the CEO of PensionBee.
My name's Tobi, I'm the founder of My Bump Pay.
I'm Damien, I run Money to the Masses. I founded Money to the Masses back in 2010.
Really challenging as costs are rising and mortgages for some people are slightly uncertain. That sets in a lot of panic. And lots of people are looking at how they can reduce certain outgoings that they have within their household. But for families, unfortunately, childcare, especially if you've got children below the age of 5, is incredibly expensive. So managing those childcare costs sometimes for many people are non-negotiable because they feel as if they have to go out and work. So some people are really thinking, what's the trade-off between building and going out to work and building their career versus childcare. So I think that naturally also impacts women quite a lot, which is quite sad to hear.
Well, I think it's a decision that would need to be considered very carefully. For most people who are paying into a pension, they are doing so through their employer, meaning they are also getting their employer's contribution, which can add up to a lot in the long term, but in the short term will be, at least 3% of salary, which is pretty meaningful. When you pay into a pension, you also get your tax top-up. So that's a 25% tax top-up on what it is that you pay in, which is usually, at least 4%.
So that's 2 lots of free money you're getting. You're getting a bit of free money from the government, a bit of free money from your employer.
Yes, so you would have to think quite hard about giving up free money, I think, especially in this kind of environment, but also just thinking about the long term and how you will, how you want to have the life that you will enjoy, when you are in your 50s, 60s, 70s or 80s. So I think it's a decision that should not be taken lightly, but for some people it's a decision that will be taken. Yeah, I mean, at PensionBee we thought about a happy retirement as our ultimate vision for what we should achieve in the UK, that everyone can look forward to a happy retirement. And we have 3 overarching principles that define that happy retirement. Financial freedom is of course a huge one. You want to be able to do all the things that you love doing, and that will be very different and very personal to everybody. We also think about good health, good physical health, good mental health, and that's really important because of the voices we hear of our customers that tell us about, how they want their pensions invested, and we can talk about, responsible or sustainable investing if you want to at some point. And then the third aspect of that is around social inclusion, because in the world that we currently live in, I think one of the most important things is that we are all able to have a happy retirement. So for us, those are the 3 key pillars of what it means.
I think everything changes when you have kids, right? But in terms of planning for a happy retirement, I guess there's just that extra thing to think about. You're planning ahead, you're thinking about your family, you might be thinking about what you may want to leave behind. Do you want to contribute to education? Do you want to contribute to property for your children? So all those things are definitely things that you may want to start thinking about. If that's your definition of a happy retirement, it's very different for every single individual. If you are having children with a partner, it's very important to have that conversation with your partner and understand what their goals are, what their status is, what kind of pension do they potentially have, what kind of life insurance do they potentially have, and make sure you understand what's in their policies and in their documents as well, because often you find that sometimes people may do things in silos and not actually understand what the other person is doing, so it's very important to read up on that as well.
Everyone's happiness, as you said, is very personal to them. And I found that when I try to think about retirement, it's this big thing and you compare it to everybody else's and that we should all be travelling and we all should be doing all this stuff and you feel like a bit of a failure. What I found was actually to turn it on its head and what didn't I want retirement to be? So if you think about the opposite, so you sit and think, well, I don't want my retirement to be like I'm having to work part-time, or you might not want to be just stuck in a certain place or live in a certain area, or whatever it might be. The things that drive you that would make you unhappy, I think that can help you then formalise what really matters to you. And then at that point, you can start to put numbers on it. And it goes back to what these guys were saying. So like Ken was saying, what mattered to you guys about being financially independent and what you wanted, you're able to then start putting numbers on that. If you just try and start with a number, then I think you're doomed to failure, to be honest with you, because I think it seems so big. And you see the numbers that we talk about, having hundreds of thousands of pounds, and then people just give up on pensions.
There are multiple ways to quantify and a couple of useful rules of thumb. I think the most well-known one is that you should seek to replace about 70% of your final salary before you go into retirement. I think that can be tricky because people usually don't linearly go into retirement. It can happen over a long period of time, but thinking about 70% of your, say, current salary and thinking about what your other financial position will look like. For example, do you still have a mortgage? Are you retired in a different country? All of these will be considerations for people to think about what is the actual last kind of salary that I need. And I think zoning in on that number is really important. And then the industry has quantified some of this, but I think these are generic ballparks and they will depend on what it is you want to do exactly. But one number that often gets thrown around is around £25,000 per year per couple. In order to have a retirement where you can afford to do many of the things that you want to do.
I think maternity pay or maternity leave is probably the biggest impact you can have in terms of your number crunching. So I always say to women or men or couples who are thinking about having children to have a look at their maternity policy, even if they think children are way, way, way in the future, just to understand what that impact is going to be in the short term, and therefore potentially what that impact could be in your long term, because obviously that reduction in earnings then impacts how much it goes into your pension pot in the long term in terms of your maternity leave. So it's quite a really good idea to have a look at those numbers as quickly and as early as you can. There is a temptation to think about, right, I'm going to be on maternity pay, which sometimes isn't much, especially as you get into the statutory realm. There is a temptation to think about stopping your contributions. So yeah, really think about it as that dimmer and the long-term opportunity cost if you do think about stopping. I advise not to as much as possible, but I understand massively that the temptation is there.
Yes, the amount you can put in is always going to determine what you're going to get out the other end. But there are other levers you can pull, like reduced charges, like getting employer contributions, like getting that tax relief. Because I think what happens, people assume they're never going to get there. But like I said, there are those levers. One of them is, if you are younger, you can take more risk with your pension. People will always assume they'll go for things that maybe will be bonds, so some of the low risk options that you have. And often the default funds in pension schemes will be very middle of the road. Whereas if you go for a higher risk plan within your pension, that means you'll be invested more in the stock market. And so there'll be the ups and downs that go along. And people always talk about, now they'll be talking about the market crash that's happening at the moment or the one in the pandemic. The reality is, if you're, say, 30, you don't need to worry about this one, because it's going to be about another 4 before you get to retirement. So why are we worrying about what's going on today? And of course, that's the answer to a lot of people who say, well, the markets have crashed, my pension's gone down. We're going to go through that cycle multiple times. That's what happens.
So what a fund does for you and what it can do for you is a couple of things. So first of all, it seeks to diversify your investments over, hundreds of different companies, so that if one or two of them aren't performing as well, then at least you have the exposure to the many other hundreds. And that's actually a lot harder to achieve, if you try and do that alone. So that's kind of point one. I think the second point, and this applies particularly to default plans within pensions, is that they tend to be governed in a way that requires the pension provider to keep an eye on the asset allocation over time, and to ensure that the asset manager that's managing that money is considering well-founded investment principles as part of doing that. Now, there's no guarantee ever with investing, but at least you have these structures and mechanisms in place that can, that can prevent some of the, I suppose, worst things that we see within markets actually occurring. Our fee range, which includes the cost of using PensionBee and also the cost of the underlying funds, is from 0.5% to 0.95%. And so the fossil fuel free plan is 0.75%. So within our range, it's priced at around the midpoint of what we have available. And part of what determines our pricing is, of course, the underlying fund charges, as I mentioned, and also the sort of availability of other products like the fossil fuel free plan within the market generally. And that plan is a plan that we invested in and created from scratch together with Legal & General. So normally when some of these new plans do come to market, they do tend to come with a slightly higher cost than, say, a 0.5% plan, and that's because they've been around for a slightly shorter time and haven't yet grown as much in assets as we hope they will grow over many, many years.
What would you say to people who maybe are put off contributing to pensions because the government are constantly, well not constantly, but periodically changing the rules, like they bring in a lifetime allowance and then they change the level of lifetime allowance. So when you think you're planning for long term, that you've got moving goalposts, what would you say to people to encourage them to keep contributing despite this?
I generally think that you have to take a step back and think about what does the government want. The incentives of the government are in many ways aligned with the incentives of the individual saver, even though sometimes it won't feel like that if they're changing and tinkering with the rules.
Because oftentimes there's this default assumption, like I said earlier, that everything will carry on a straight line. But the reality of life is that that's not how life actually works. Like, things happen and things change. So the order of your investing could change depending on what your personal circumstances are. So whilst the default might still be that with long term, obviously from a tax perspective, it's much better to put money into your pensions and so on, but you have to really pay close attention to just your personal life and just how things are going, because that could change the order in which you invest your money.
For the most part, there are still defined benefit pensions, meaning there is a guarantee of a salary in later life, and the risk around the achievability of that salary is borne by the employer, which can relieve a lot of the pressure, one would hope, around preparing yourself and preparing your pot. But what we also do find is that many of our customers, they are working in the public sector, but they also still want to save into a private pension. And I think there the goal is to do the best that you can as early as you can. And really, if you can hone into that early point, the earliest point that's possible, then you have a very good chance of having the opportunity to realize some of that investment growth. But certainly the element of the defined benefit pension within the public sector, I think, is still very reassuring.
Trying to plan as much as possible in terms of you could be using different platforms for a private pension, or you could be looking at other different vehicles. So it could potentially be property, potentially if you're kind of using that income to kind of looking at your pension. But it's the same way that you look at your own personal finances and just making sure that you have some money kind of tucked away for the future, and make sure that you've got clarity in terms of what that goal is and what that potentially looks like.
Yeah, I think it's important to choose a pension product where you can start and stop, depending on what suits you, and also a product that doesn't have a minimum contribution amount, which sometimes you can still find in certain products. So starting and stopping as you wish, no minimums. Ease of contributions, I find, is a really important factor.
What do you mean by that?
So sometimes it feels like we are all so incredibly busy and our personal finances can fall a little bit to the wayside, and I certainly find that often with my own. And if you are an employed person, then your pension just happens automatically through automatic enrollment. If you're self-employed, you have to sort it out for yourself. And so being able to do it in a simple and easy way that fits with your lifestyle and your working habits and when you want to do it, I think is absolutely critical. You know, you can contribute through a limited company, that's great. You don't have to have a limited company to do it though. You can still pay in and get that 25% tax top up, because that comes on your personal contribution that you make. I think what we find now is that people are trying to consume as much content as they can in a variety of different formats to build up their own personal knowledge and understanding and comfort. And I think it is hard because there's no shortcut to doing it, but making it part of your daily habits to, you know, read something about personal finance or listen to a podcast. We have the Pension Confident podcast. You know, listen to podcasts, I think, read blogs and articles from trusted sources. And then I think really ask yourself, what do I want to know as well? Because there are various ways that another person can help you. So is it financial coaching, which is a bit more about, you know, how do I manage budgets? How do I do things, you know, holistically? Or do I want actually some advice on tax? And so before you get to the product point, make sure that you've had a think about, I think, you know, the coaching, the tax optimizations, and done what you can do, which is a lot, you know, online.